live.
Are we good, Dan?
Yes, sir.
Yep, thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the WMATA Executive Committee meeting of October 22nd, 2020. Before we begin, I'd like to ask our Chief Safety Officer, Teresa Impastato, to provide us with our safety contact. Ms. Impastato.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're entering the 10th month of our pandemic response, and all of us are feeling the effects of the current climate. To date at Metro, we've experienced 397 reported cases of COVID-19 among our workforce, 384 of whom have returned to work. These cases are not merely statistics. They are dedicated employees and members of the communities we serve. We're acutely aware that each member of our team has been impacted by the pandemic, and we applaud their bravery, service, and personal sacrifice in the execution of their duties. As we move into the winter months, it becomes all the more important that we continue vigilance in our efforts to keep ourselves and our loved ones healthy. Each of us can do our part to protect our communities by continuing to follow CDC guidance to prevent the transmission of COVID-19 by wearing a facial covering, practicing social distancing, and employing good hand hygiene. Additionally, getting a flu vaccine is more important than ever during this season to protect yourself and the people around you from flu, and to help reduce the strain on healthcare systems responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. Flu vaccines are offered in many doctors' offices, clinics, health departments, pharmacies, and health centers, as well as by many employers. Consider getting a flu shot today. Mr. Chairman, that contact.
Thank you, Ms. Impastato. Next, we'll move on to our first item, and that is approval of the agenda. If there are no objections, we'll consider the agenda approved as presented. Does anyone have any objections? Okay, thank you. The agenda is approved. Next, to the approval of the minutes. We have two sets of minutes to approve this morning. I would like to move approval of the minutes of the October 8th public meeting and the October 8th executive session. Is there a second?
Second, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. There is a second. I hope you all had a chance to look at those minutes. Does anyone have any changes or recommendations for changes? If not, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Executive Committee members, any opposed? The minutes are approved. We only have one item on our agenda today. The committee will hear from Metro's external auditors on the authority's financial statement and single audit. Subsection 70A of the WMATA Compact requires that the report of the annual independent audit shall be prepared in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles and shall be filed with the chairman and other officers as the board shall direct. This does not require board or committee action. I would like to turn the floor over to our Inspector General, Jeff Charrington, who has directed the audit and will introduce our external auditor to provide an overview of its findings. Mr. Charrington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. We're proud to say that we completed the financial statement audit of Metro, and I'm here to introduce Valerie Coleman from RSM, who we contract out to do the independent audit. So Valerie, if you please give the presentation.
Absolutely, thank you. I'll share my screen now. And Dan, all yours.
Thank you, Valerie. If we can move forward a couple of slides beyond the table of contents. There we go. Good morning, everybody. My name is Dan Barnett, and I'm the audit partner responsible for signing the Metro opinions. I'm here to report today that at this point it says we have completed the audit of the financial statements as of and for the fiscal year ended June 30, 2020. We did issue our opinion on those financial statements yesterday, and our opinion is unmodified, which is to say that the financial statements are fairly stated in all material respects in accordance with GAAP. There is a little bit of a wrinkle in the process this year as a result of COVID-19. So as we are all well aware, the federal government pumped a significant amount of money into the economy as a result of the CARES Act. The compliance supplement is issued by the Office of Management and Budget on an annual basis. And that compliance supplement is a document that we as the auditors use to test compliance with the expectations of the federal government relative to the expenditure of these federal dollars. Because of the timing of the CARES Act distribution, when they released the compliance supplement this year in August, they specifically omitted any guidance at all as it relates to auditing the CARES Act program. The OMB is intending to issue a supplement to the compliance supplement sometime this fall, which at this point appears to be projecting sometime around Thanksgiving. And that document will provide us with clear guidance in terms of the testing that we are required to perform over the CARES Act funding. At this point, we have substantially completed all of our testing of the federal grant programs, including $228 million of CARES Act funding, which is included in the federal transit cluster. So as part of that process, we did review the grant to try to identify whether there were any new or unique compliance requirements. Otherwise, we tested that program the way we would have always tested it, because the federal transit cluster has been around for many years, and it's been a major program for WMATA also for many years. So at this point, we do not believe that when the compliance supplement comes out that there will be any significant changes or additions that we would need to perform in our test work. However, because we don't know, we are holding off on issuing our uniform grant guidance report until that guidance is issued from OMB. Our expectation is that we'll be in a position to issue that single audit report sometime shortly after Thanksgiving. So in the audit process, there are certain responsibilities that rest with the auditor and certain responsibilities that rest with management. A detailed description of those are included in the arrangement letter that was dated April 27th. And those responsibilities that rest with management, we will actually ask them to provide us in the form of a management representation letter under their letterhead and signature, affirming to us all of their responsibilities as part of the audit process. And I can summarize that by saying, management is responsible for preparing the financial statements in accordance with GAAP, for developing and implementing effective internal controls, and really making us aware of everything we need to know in order to do our job. So we do have that letter. It's the final piece of audit evidence that supported the release of our opinion yesterday. When we met with this committee before the start of the engagement, we did provide you the required pre-audit communications, which included an assessment of risk and exposure that would be our focus during the audit process. I'm here to tell you that there were no changes to that preliminary assessment of risk as a result of the audit process. So said more simply, we did not find anything in our testing that we did not expect going in. So when we do an audit, we audit every account, but there are places that we're going to go deeper and we're going to spend more time just because the account itself might be more complex. There might be a new accounting standard that needs to be implemented that will impact the reported balances. There could be a management estimate where management has the ability to influence the numbers that are presented in the financial statements. So I'm going to turn it over to Valerie to spend just a couple of minutes talking about those areas where we did increase our efforts or our focus in this year's audit cycle.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dan. So noted within here are the areas that really require a lot of judgment and they're deemed estimates. So we did take a look into these specific areas, and normally what we do in this arena is just check to see if there's been a change or a swing within that particular estimate or judgment from year over year. So taking a look at the unearned fair revenues is a key area, self-insurance liability, the pensions, the OPEB, compensated absence, and even depreciation of the capital assets. Those are all areas that really afford management to have some estimates and judgments relating to that. Additionally, some key areas we've noted into is the internal accounting and financial reporting of controls. We obviously have the impact of COVID-19 on the authority to take into consideration. As it relates to the valuation of certain key disclosures, such as the OPEB and pension, payroll and expenditure classification and accuracy. These are all noted within here, but these are some key areas of focus for us. The classification of the net position, any litigation and other contingencies are areas of focus as well. and including the compliance with the federal awards. Again, as Dan alluded to, this is an area of focus, including with the CARES Act. This is an area where we reviewed about 4 or 5 major key programs and really focus in understanding the proper revenue recognition on the financial side, as well as the overall compliance regulations relating to the federal awards.
Go ahead, Val.
Okay, so as it relates to COVID-19 and its impact, obviously our lives changed in March, and you guys have absolutely been having a key focus for this particular area. How we approached is extensive communication. This audit was done virtually. This was very new for all of us in relation to how we were going to get this through this finish line in a virtual environment. With this extensive communication, we really started having understandings with management. What were your internal control changes? We looked at it as a pre-COVID environment and a post-COVID environment. Were there any sort of controls in place pre-COVID that could not be in place post-COVID? If those controls could not be in place, did it lend itself to any fraud or incentives and opportunities for fraud to occur? Next, we had extensive communication as it relates to the impact. Do you need to do furloughs? Is there any terminations and severance that could potentially impact the financials overall? Having that extensive communication with management allowed us to understand what COVID was happening to the authority as it was happening. Lastly, subsequent events and disclosure requirements. What does this mean overall? You'll see within the financials, lots of disclosures relating to COVID-19 and the authority. This is something that the region has been experiencing. This is something that will continue to be experienced as it relates to the upcoming fiscal year. We really have had extensive communication with management as it relates to what is transpiring in this COVID-19 environment. And communication was key. We had continuous communication throughout the audit process to really understand the impact overall, as well as what that means for the authority in general.
Yeah, I know, if I could just add to that, Val, when we went into this audit process, I will not lie to you in sharing with you now that I had very significant concerns as to whether or not we would be in a position to be in this room today, or virtual room. This is a very complex audit with a lot of moving parts, and doing it in person is difficult and complicated. So trying to do it remotely, I had concerns as to whether or not we would be able to effectively complete this audit in a timely manner. And what I can tell you is it has exceeded all expectations I ever could have had for how smooth a process was, how responsive the management team was, how effective the exchange of information was. And honestly, this is probably the first time in the years that I've served the account where I don't think a single deadline was missed by management in terms of what was promised to us as a deliverable on a certain date. I literally think every single deadline was accomplished this year in a timely manner, and that is a first. So I wanted to make sure that I took the opportunity. As a result of the audit process, there were no recorded audit adjustments. So no matters that we identified that recorded an adjustment to the original trial balance that was provided to us. There is one past adjustment. There's two past adjustments, I apologize. The first past adjustment really relates to an issue that was identified a couple of years ago. And it's related to a lease accounting entry. This entry will continue to repeat as a past adjustment until it amortizes away or becomes immaterial. So this will just continue to roll over each year. The second is just a difference of opinion relative to the calculation that was done by the authority's actuaries as compared to our actuaries as it relates to workers' comp and third-party liability. So as Val had indicated, when we look at estimates, we look at two things. First, we look at, is the approach that management has taken to develop these estimates, is it reasonable? Does it make sense? Is it logical? Is it consistent with what we see in the industry? But then more importantly, is the approach consistently applied, which is to say, when you have a range of estimate, you've got a high end and you've got a low end and you've got a middle. So what we look for is if every year management takes that middle road in terms of the range of estimate, and then all of a sudden one year they go to the high end of the range or the low end of the range, that would be a red flag for us. In this particular case, as it relates to the workers' comp and third-party liability, management has always been on the low end of the range as calculated by our actuaries. Back in 2017, we had a similar past adjustment. This past adjustment, again, effectively says, in the opinion of our actuaries, the liability should be approximately $4.9 million higher. But at the end of the day, that amount is not material, and we don't believe that anybody would come to a different conclusion about the financial condition of Metro had this entry been recorded. These are a series of additional required communications, and I won't go through each of these. I will highlight as we get to the significant items discussed with management. So the OPEB fiduciary fund reporting, there was a standard that was scheduled to be implemented this year as it relates to the reporting of fiduciary funds, which in your case would include the pensions and the OPEB plan. Because of COVID-19, the GASB deferred the implementation of that standard, but the OPEB trust accounting is something that's been on the radar screen for a couple of years. It's never been material, so we've just ignored having to deal with it because it would be addressed in GASB 84. This year, however, there was a significant contribution that was made to the OPEB trust, which made it material. So we had to do more research to make sure that the accounting that was being applied by the authority was appropriate. And our conclusion was that, in fact, it was appropriate. The actuarial mortality tables, this is in the nuance of accounting and actuary land. There are mortality tables that are used as the underlying basis to determine the overall pension and OPEB liabilities. A couple of years ago, new mortality tables were developed, which were specifically geared towards public sector employees. The actuarial table, the actuarial calculations that are performed this year were not prepared using those public sector-based mortality tables. They were based on the tables that were in existence at the time the original studies were done 2 and 3 years ago. The GASB allows those to be done on a biennial triennial basis. So the use of those schedules was not inappropriate in any way, but we did recommend to management that when the new when the new actuarial studies are performed in this coming fiscal year, that the actuaries consider whether the use of those public sector tables is appropriate. So we did spend quite a bit of time working through that issue with management. And the only other thing really in here that I would like to point out is the schedule of expenditures of federal awards. So this is one of the findings that has been reported over the last couple of years, which really relates to the timing of when expenditures are reported in the general ledger as compared to when they get reported in the schedule of expenditures of federal awards for reporting to the federal government. And in all the years that we've been serving you, there have been year-over-year differences in terms of things being reported in the general ledger in one year and in the schedule of expenditures of federal awards in another year. So we did spend quite a bit of time this year looking through the language that is provided for in the grant agreements to support the conclusion that management's actions in the way that they report that are appropriate. So we do have a separate letter that we will provide to management, which just provides recommendations for best practices and improvements in process and controls. There is nothing in that letter that rises to the level of either a significant deficiency or a material weakness in internal controls. Had those existed, we would be required to share those with this committee. The additional reporting that we do, as you're aware, under the Uniform Grant Guidance, has us focus on issues relative to compliance and internal controls over compliance, as well as internal control over financial reporting. So there are 2 separate reports that we issue. In past years, we have reported findings in both of those categories, internal controls over financial reporting and internal controls over compliance. This year, I'm happy to say, again, for the first time, I think since we've been involved as your auditor, there are no findings that will be reported to the federal government. Yeah. In the prior year, there were two significant deficiencies that were reported. One, as it relates to the reporting of compensated absences, and the other as it relates to the schedule of expenditures of federal awards. Both of those have been resolved in the current year and are not repeating. There is one matter that continues to be an area of focus that we have recommended to management. As you remember, 2 years ago now, I think there was an attempt to implement the Kronos system over your payroll process, and that implementation did not go well. The implementation is not gone. It is in the process of being reviewed, and a plan is being rolled out to again try to implement Kronos. And that will be a significant area of focus and a significant area of concern, which should be coming up, I believe, in the FY22 audit cycle. So that's something we continue to point out and emphasize. A lot here relative to GASB standards that were deferred. There are two GASB standards that are important and require consideration. The first is as it relates to fiduciary activities, which I had already alluded to regarding the pension and OPEB reporting. That will be implemented next year, and management at this point effectively has already done their research, and they're in a position to implement that without, I anticipate, any significant problems. The lease standard is deferred now for 2 years, but the lease standard is going to be a very significant concern for the authority. It is a very significant exercise that involves, first of all, identifying your population of leases. And that's not just the straight up lease that you might know, like a vehicle lease or a copier lease. That includes all real estate leases. And it includes anything that might have an embedded lease buried within the contract. So for example, if you have a telephone contract, and that telephone contract, it includes hardware like phones and speakerphones, those are considered embedded leases that also have to be included in the population. So this is going to take a very significant amount of time on management's part in order to implement. And it is strongly recommended that there's some sort of technology to support the lease. There are going to be way too many leases for this to be effectively reported using Excel spreadsheets. So we've continued to have these discussions with management that should be on the top of everybody's radar screen at this point. There are additional reports which are similar to what we've done in prior years. The agreed upon procedures report around the NTD database reporting, as well as the reconciliation of expenses in the Regional Customer Service Center and the Regional Software Maintenance Agreement. Those are things that we've historically done. And this year there will be a new report, a new agreed upon procedures engagement that's focused on the expenditure funds under the dedicated funding. So that will be new. And in fact, those procedures we're in the process of finalizing what those will look like now. But those are 3 additional reports that will come out of this engagement. And that is the end of our formal communication. And with that, I'll turn it back to the committee for any questions, thoughts, comments, or concerns.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Valerie. Appreciate that very much. Mr. Charrington, any final comments before I open it up?
No, sir. I do want to thank RSM. I'd like to thank the OIG staff, but in particular, I'd like to thank Metro Management for helping facilitate this. Dennis Anasiki and his staff, Liz Sullivan, and all the other management officials and staff at Metro that helped out through this process. I thank them very much. That's all I have, sir.
Yeah, thank you. All right, Ms. Gideby, any questions or comments?
I just wanted to also offer my appreciation to the team, especially during this time to conduct this investigation or audit. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Goldman.
Thank you. Yes, I want to congratulate the general manager and the chief financial officer, Mr. Anaseki, and his team for being able to work with the accountants and bring forth what you've described, Dan and Valerie, as a clean audit opinion. This has been a big change from my earlier days with WMATA, when the production of the financial statements and the audit was always a very difficult experience, and one that didn't always result in clean opinions. So the management team should be congratulated for efforts to turn around this area of the authority's financial management practices. I wanted to ask a question about the CARES Act that you referred to earlier, and specifically, I guess you referenced, a number of 228 million, which I assume is the amount of CARES Act funds that were used or credited for substitution of fair revenue for the period between March and June 30th, 2020, the end of the fiscal year. The question I want to ask is, how do the fiscal year 2020 financial statement or statements reflect these CARES Act funds that were received to replace fair revenue that was lost or not provided for this period? Are they reflected as on a line of income as fair revenue would be reflected, or are they reflected in some other way on the financial statements?
Yeah. So Val, I don't know if you want to, I don't know exactly what line item they're sitting in, but they are reported, it's reported as grant income, and it's reported below the operating line. So it's not buried above, so that it reflects as operating revenue. The treatment under GASB requires that grant income to be reported effectively as non-operating. So it's immediately below the operating indicator on the financial statements.
Is it presented in a way that separates it from the federal funds received for capital programs, as opposed to the CARES Act funds that are really substitute for operating revenue?
Yeah, so the capital funding is reported separately from the operational subsidies, but it is not distinctly identified as its own line item. So it is buried within other grant income that supports the operations, but it is separate and distinct from capital.
Okay, and is there an accounting standard as yet that essentially establishes a best practice for the way transit authorities are supposed to present this CARES Act revenue on their financial statements?
Yeah, so there's not a new accounting standard that addresses this, but the GASB did issue specific guidance, effectively what I would call a white paper, that gave very specific instruction as to how these dollars were. So the guidance already existed within existing standards. So this memo effectively just clarified which components of the existing standards need to be applied in reporting these funds.
And so the authority's financial statements reflect that guidance?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
And that would be similar guidance that other transit authorities around the country would use, so that one could be able to compare the amount of CARES Act funds that were received from different authorities in using that standard.
Yeah, so the only distinction would be it's optional as to whether or not you report this as a combined number with all other similar grants, or whether you would report it separately as its own line item. In the case of Washington Metro, they have reported it collectively with the other similar grant income. I do not know yet what other transit agencies have done. However, the amount is identified in footnote disclosure and clearly identified in the CFA. So
very good.
Easily tracked in multiple places.
Great. Thank you for that explanation. I have no further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. Mr. Horner?
Thank you very much. I have a brief series of questions relating to the mortality tables used to calculate the liability of the pension systems. I'm fascinated by the topic, and it actually surprised me that it would occur to anyone to calculate mortality tables for a subset of the population, in this case, public sector employees. I'm wondering, without holding you to it, and just for your thoughts, whether the adoption of the public sector employee mortality tables for purposes of calculating the liability of the pensions would have the effect of increasing or decreasing the protected liability of the pension accounts or systems.
Yeah, so Val, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but so we did talk to our actuaries about this, and I believe that the number that we calculated would have been approximately a $9 million increase in the overall liability related to the plans. One of the plans has already converted. One of the 5 plans has already converted to the new tables. The other 4 plans, we actually talked to the actuary, and you're not required to use the public sector mortality tables, even if you're a public sector entity, if you can demonstrate that your actual experience is different than the public sector mortality tables. And so we did talk to your actuary, we did talk to our actuary, and your actuary has not done that analysis yet, but does believe that their experience more closely aligns to the tables that they're currently using anyway. So it may well be that the determination is made when the new study is done this year that using the existing tables or the existing study is actually more appropriate than the public sector mortality tables. So, which is why there's no past adjustment that we're reporting to you relative to the pensions, because we were able to obtain enough evidence to conclude that we believe that management's estimate remains reasonable.
Just a quick follow up on that, is the estimate used now, the mortality tables used now, tables derived from an internal estimate of the longevity of Amada employees, or is it based on mortality tables for a general population?
Yeah, so there are, by the way, many different types of mortality tables. Mm-hmm. So the tables that are actually used in the other 4 plans are they're commercial mortality tables, and not specific experienced studies. But your actuary actually does an analysis to measure actual experience against the tables that are used. So they're actually using published mortality tables, but comparing that against your actual experience to determine whether or not they're reasonable.
And are you, does RSNA, your shop, evaluate the reasonableness of the estimates of the specific experience?
Yeah, so that's
someone
where,
else.
Exactly. So that's where, so as part of the audit process, our independent actuaries look at the report that's prepared by your actuary and determine there's a number of underlying assumptions that support the calculation, one of which is the mortality tables. So in looking at other actuarial assumptions, all of those were deemed to be reasonable and within an appropriate range and consistent with the GASB standards. It's the mortality table issue that by default, if you're a public sector entity, by default, you would be expected to use the public sector table. So that's where we got the actuaries together through a series of communications to determine, you asked the question, well, why didn't you use the public sector mortality tables? Well, at the time, they didn't exist. So that's the simple answer. But then the question becomes, when they reassess every year to determine whether or not it's appropriate to continue to use the study, do they have sufficient evidence to support their conclusion that the existing tables are appropriate? So that's where it gets into the whole, where our actuary supports the conclusion that what your actuary did is appropriate. And we do, again, do some of the math to determine, okay, so what would the maximum potential misstatement look like if they had defaulted to the public sector tables? So it's a series of ongoing communications, but it's all based on our actuary's assessment of not only the skills in qualifications, but also whether the assumptions applied are appropriate and reasonably supported.
Excellent. I have one more question pertaining to this topic. And again, with apologies for potentially putting you on the spot, and please feel free to defer or reserve if you don't know the answer off the top of your head. I recall that perhaps 2 years ago, GASB required public sector organizations to use a new discount rate for estimating the amount of unfunded pension liability. Has WMATA adopted a new discount rate, or the pension administrator adopted a new discount rate for estimating the level of unfunded pension liabilities? And if
Yes.
so, what is it?
Yep. So, so Val, you might be able to help with this if I don't know if you have it there, but what I will tell you is that again, the assumptions that are used are appropriate, considered appropriate and within acceptable range under the GASB standard. So I don't know, well, because there's 5 plans, there's actually 5 different discount rates that are applied, but they're generally between, I want to say 6.5% and 7.5%. Which is certainly reasonable, and it's consistent with our experience. The move relative to the discount rates actually started to play out probably 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago now, because in the post recession era, the post 2008 recession era, you know, 8% was pretty standard, and sometimes you could even see 8.5% on discount rates. And that assumes that over a long term, you're going to generate that type of return in support of your pension assets.
Yep.
And you know, 10-year experience studies would certainly prove that to be much lower. But then there's the theoretical argument that says, well, this pension plan is not intended to cover 10 years; it's intended to cover 100. So you know, what is that? But to your point, that began a general trend of discount rates moving downward, and WMATA's discount rates have
Does GASB require, I'm sorry to take time, but I think it's actually quite important. Does GASB require regular reassessment of the discount rate used, because we're in a potentially long-term environment of low yields on the relevant benchmarks? And then that's my last question, please.
Yes, so every year, so the studies are only required to be done on a biennial or triennial basis. But each year, those assumptions need to be looked at to determine whether or not they remain appropriate. And if they're not, then projections have to be reprojected based on any proposed changes. So yes, that is standard practice, and the authority is absolutely following that practice.
Thank you.
Mr. Horner?
No, that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Letourneau, we'll open it up to other members of the board. Mr. Letourneau.
I really don't have any questions at this point.
Okay, thank you. Secretary Slater.
No questions for me. Just want to echo the thank you for all the hard work in a pretty difficult environment to perform an audit like this. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Meridian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have any questions.
Thank you. Mr. McMillan.
No questions. Thank you.
Okay. Again, thank you, Dan and Valerie. Very much appreciate it. And as I believe it was Mr. Goldman who said it, the audit really has come a long way. And not only, you know, credit to, you know, staff, but, you know, staff really stepping up here and seeing that this is taken seriously, and we have something that we can use moving forward. So, all right. If there's no further business before us, and we don't need to take any action here, so the board, this meeting will stand adjourned, and the board meeting shortly. So please stay tuned. Thank you very much. Let me okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the WMATA board meeting of September 22nd, 2020. Thank you all for joining us. I'd like to ask the board corporate secretary, Ms. Ellison, to call the roll. Ms. Ellison.
Thank you. Chair Smedberg,
Present.
Vice Chair Giddy,
Present.
Vice Chair Goldman,
Present.
Director Horner,
Present.
Director Letourneau,
Present.
Alternate Director Meridian,
Present.
Director Slater,
Present.
Director McMillan.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Ellison. Now we'll move on to our next item, approval of the agenda. The agenda is before us. If there are no objections, I'd like to consider the agenda approved as presented. Does anyone have any objections or additions? If there are none, thank you. The agenda is approved. Next, approval of minutes. We have 4 sets of minutes for approval this morning: the September 24th board meeting, the September 24th executive session, the October 8th board executive session, and the October 16th board executive session. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Seconded by Secretary Slater. Does anyone have any questions or comments on those sets of minutes? If not, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing no objections, the ayes have it. Thank you. Next, we will move on to public comment. For this meeting, I'd like people to know that we received 95 submissions for public comment, all of them related to the electrification of Metro's bus fleet in relation to the Northern Bus Garage. As indicated on our website, we normally have a 10-minute limit on the public comment period at the board meetings. However, given the amount of comments we received, I'm going to double the time to 20 minutes for today. We will play the voicemails and video we received, as well as read the first 10 emails received. The remainder of the email comments will be posted online. Finally, the board will receive a copy of all written submissions, and that'll be available to you on your Diligent app. So now let's hear from our customers. It'll just take a moment.
Comments submitted in writing as requested here. The first 10. Number 1, David Kubrick. Please develop a totally electric bus fleet by no later than 2045. Not only will this improve our air quality and health, but it also will be a fine step toward doing the Washington area's share of addressing the global climate crisis. We owe this to our children and all future generations. The economic price of an electric bus system will of course be high. However, the price of moving slowly to address climate change will lead to economic disaster. Public comment number 2 from Melanie DeCola. I know budgets are tight right now, but I do still support an urgency for WMATA to support full bus electrification. I live in Alexandria along a very busy route with at least 2 Metrobus routes and 2 to 3 Dash buses going by my home every day. I do think about the amount of air pollution I am breathing because of this and would feel more confident if I knew buses were electric. I always enjoyed riding the electric circulator buses when one was on offer in Roslyn, and know personally how much more pleasant the experience of riding an electric bus can be in terms of the smells and noise. This is an investment worth making. The DMV region needs to lead on climate mitigation efforts too, and WMATA is a huge part of this. I wish your budgets were bigger and your service was better. Electrifying your bus fleet would go a long way toward to helping the regions meet its economic goals. Thank you, Melanie. Public comment number 3. From Scott Williamson. I write to urge the Metro Board to electrify its bus fleet over the next 2 decades in line with proposals by the Sierra Club, the Union of Concerned Scientists, and many other organizations. We in the DC area have seen dramatic improvements in air quality as travel has fallen due to restrictions in response to the novel coronavirus outbreak. This is the air quality we deserve to have even when transportation systems are running at robust levels. It should not take a pandemic to clean the air, and thankfully it does not have to. EV technology is progressing rapidly, and electric bus technology has been tested and piloted for over a decade now. The Metro Board should note this rapid progress, as well as the technology's quickly falling price premiums, and also note that the rising capacity of batteries will allow for heavier and heavier vehicles to be powered effectively by this technology. Think of the chance to remove lung-damaging particulates from the air. Think also of the chance to keep buses rolling more steadily as oil changes and brake replacements are reduced and engine maintenance becomes much simpler. As a fan of rapid transit's power to enhance access, equity, and economic opportunity for citizens of the region, I hope we can also remove its polluting side effect and do so as fast as possible. As a fan of the National Capital Region's leadership role in the world, I hope we can be unafraid to blaze trails for sustainability and make markets for the next best thing. Public comment number 4. From Nicola Hayes Allen. I support the Sierra Club's position that we in DC should decide now to move to 100% electrification of our buses by 2045. It doesn't make sense that we aim to generate 100% of our electricity by 2032 and yet continue to buy and run fossil fuel burning buses. Not only will an all-electric bus fleet make DC public transport carbon neutral, it will also eliminate toxic emissions from public transport. As the mother of a child who grew up in DC with serious asthma, this is something I care very much about. We must protect all of DC's children and other vulnerable people from the effects of toxic emissions. Please support the move to an all-electric bus fleet by 2045. Public comment number 5 is from Mark Stevens. I am writing to support a WMATA commitment to 100% electrification of its transit bus fleet by 2045 or sooner, as this would save the city money in the long run. Buses that run on fossil fuel will have no value in 20 years, whereas the batteries in electric buses will maintain their value, either through reuse as batteries or for the minerals they contain. Public comment number 6 from Laura Peterson. In WMATA's updated sustainability plan, I would like to see a strong commitment to and plan for transitioning all buses in Metro's fleet to 100% electric by 2045. The Sierra Club published a report outlining the benefits of this, which include not only the critical environmental benefit, but also long-term economic savings for WMATA. It's a no-brainer. This is the way to go. Please include a plan for this change based on the Sierra Club's recommendations. Thank you. Public comment number 7 from Russell Clark of DC. As a resident of 16th Street Heights and chair of the Community Environmental Committee for the rebuild of the Northern Bus Garage 1 block from my house, I can share that electrification of WMATA's bus fleet is the most unanimous position the community has expressed. The community has been subject to the emissions from a large fleet of exclusively diesel buses since the 1960s. That is when electric trolleys were replaced in an unfortunate step backward on air quality. And besides being a resident close to a WMATA bus garage, I am also a regular bike commuter who spent decades leapfrogging buses that blew their concentrated exhaust literally in my face when tailpipes were located under the bumpers. And when tailpipes moved above the bus, emissions would often be sucked down to fill the air gap behind the accelerating bus, which didn't eliminate the health hazard. It is past time for WMATA to release a transparent plan with concrete timelines for phasing in electric buses for the benefit of the residents of the region, as well as the health and eventual recovery of our quickly ailing planet. There are many financial, technological, and power supply hurdles that can remain excuses for inaction or become the drivers for action once coupled with concrete fleet transition commitments. Many different stakeholders from across the region will need to become engaged and be creative about overcoming the hurdles, but the experience of jurisdictions around the U.S. ahead of our own on this front can be mined for ideas, strategies, and lessons learned. To that end, I fully endorse the Sierra Club's report and support its call for WMATA to both commit to a 100% electric bus fleet by 2045, as well as publicly share the steps it will be taking to achieve this goal. Public comment number 8, Yasha Magarik. I strongly urge WMATA to electrify its entire bus fleet by 2045. I actually think WMATA should move more quickly and aim to electrify its entire bus fleet by 2030, but I realize it's enough of a push to get the board to do anything. The Sierra Club's recent report on this topic is just one consideration. I also think the direct public health benefits to DC residents, for example, not breathing in particulate matter or nitrous oxide, particularly the number of asthma incidents and allergies it would avoid compel such action. This is not to mention the noise reduction on roadways and, of course, the carbon mitigation needs, which should be driving the goal forward to 2030 from 2045. The fact is, the Washington, D.C. area is woefully behind other developed nations and cities that are moving far more aggressively to electrify the necessary vehicle infrastructure. To commit to 2045 date is really a compromise. To not even do that would fail your constituents and their children and their children's children and invite their ridicule on you and your legacy. Public comment number 9 from Tim Stevens. I support conversion of WMATA buses from fossil fuel to electric. Doing so would add momentum to the general need to convert our vehicles to electric. My understanding is that electric vehicles significantly reduce pollution, including greenhouse gases and particulate matter, are quieter, and will eventually save money from operation. I participate in the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments environmental committees and am actively support conversion of school buses to electric where I live in Falls Church. And finally, public comment number 10 from Elizabeth Karasik. Electrifying Metro's bus fleet would save the agency hundreds of millions of dollars on lifetime fleet operating costs, reduce annual carbon pollution by more than 58,000 tons by 2030 and more in later years, and reduce the public health toll that toxic air pollution has on the area's most vulnerable residents and save millions of dollars in avoided healthcare costs. Mr. Chair, as requested, the remaining public comments submitted in writing will be available on wmata.com for review by the public at any time. And now here are public comments submitted by audio or video recording.
Hey WMATA Board, my name is Alex. I'm a Ward 4 resident, and I wanted to thank you for giving us a chance to weigh in on the question of whether WMATA should go all electric. I decided to take this video in front of the Uptown Northern Bus Garage, which is in my neighborhood, and as I'm sure you know, whether to go all electric is a huge question as it relates to this redevelopment project. The garage is slated to have the facilities for an all-electric fleet, but right now the plans don't include the actual buses that will be electric. Right now the plan still includes diesel buses, and everyone in the neighborhood wants to see that change. I saw the plans include going all electric by 2045, and I'm here to say that that is absolutely not good enough. LA is planning to, and other cities that are comparable to DC are planning, or even bigger, are planning to go all electric in much shorter timelines. And this project in particular, we want to see is going to be reopened in 4 years, and we want to see an all electric fleet go in up here. I want to say that I support that too. I really encourage you to shorten that time horizon and get all electrics faster than the next 25 years. I think we can do it, and I think we need to do it, not only for climate change, but for the city as a whole. Thanks for your consideration.
Hello, my name is Davey Yarborough. I am a resident of Northwest Washington, D.C. I am calling to state that I am totally against bringing back the diesel buses at the bus barn located at 14th and Decatur Northwest due to the negative effects it has on our community from the emissions and what the reconstruction of that facility will bring.
My name is Esther Williams Yarborough. I live in Washington, D.C., near the Northern Bus Barn. I am calling to express my concerns about the bus barn coming back with diesel fueled buses and the health issues it could cause my community, could and has caused my community. I would like very much for the bus barn to please consider coming back with all electric buses for this community, period. You are hurting us, and you need to know that you are hurting this community. I do hope that you will find some community spirit in the way that you deal with us in the future. Again, my name is Esther Williams Yarborough. My phone number is 202-291-1949. Thank you very much.
My name is Gloria Clark. I live at 1400 Emerson Street, Northwest near the 14th Street bus barn. And I'm calling to ask that the bus barn not come back to the neighborhood until they improve the until they electrify all of the buses that are sent out of that bus barn. We shouldn't have to wait until 2045 for this to happen. Metro should immediately stop buying diesel buses and go to all electric. We shouldn't have to wait another 25 years for relief from the debilitating health effects of diesel fumes and diesel particulate matter. Thank you.
My name is Tanya Rennie. I live on Emerson Street around the corner from the bus barn in Washington, D.C. in 16th Street Heights. And I wanted to urge WMATA to electrify its vehicles as soon as possible. We live in a residential neighborhood, and we clearly missed the opportunity to move the bus barn out of a residential area. And so we're here stuck with a new property and new construction here in our neighborhood, which will include a lot of buses coming and going, and the particulate matter is intense and not good for our health. And so it should be seen as a huge priority to put electric vehicles on the street so that we don't have to suffer that as a residential neighborhood. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Blythe Emmy Holtz, and I live in the 16th Street Heights neighborhood of Washington, D.C. And I'm calling, please consider making all buses electric by 2045 in reference to the Sierra Club report, which I believe you have a copy of. I live in this neighborhood. My children have asthma. Adding more diesel buses is a huge threat to our health, and the environmental pollution is a terrible, terrible thing. We are very concerned. We've been making our voices clear at meetings, but it seems like there's no response to the environmental concerns that are been voiced by these neighbors. I'm calling just please to consider the Sierra Club's report and the call to make buses electric by 2045. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Cindy Morgan Jaffe. I live one block from the bus barn that's located on 14th Street and Decatur. So I live at 1309 Emerson Street, and we have a household here that has wanted to remove the buses from our location for a variety of reasons. We do support the need for transit, so what we would like to advocate for are electrifying the fleet. And my daughter also works in transit and has done a lot of research on this and believes that the electric buses are an excellent option for a variety of reasons. So please support that. We think that that is the wave of the future and also for our planet, environment, and neighborhood. Thank you.
My name is Jason Kelleher. I live at 15th Street Northwest in the 16th Street Heights neighborhood of DC, and I am calling because I would like to express my strong opinion that the bus barn at 14th and Decatur, which is being renovated, be a 100% electric fleet. My reasons for wanting that are that we are raising a lot of children in the neighborhood, and we have a lot of elderly residents, and we have concerns about the diesel fumes and the lack of a full environmental survey. 100% electric would mitigate that concern. So thank you very much for your consideration.
Good morning. My name is Elisa Irwin, and I live on Varnum Street Northwest in the 16th Street Heights neighborhood. I am calling on behalf of support of the electrification of buses at the Northern Bus Barn that is being rebuilt on 14th Street Northwest in my neighborhood. I applaud the efforts of Sierra Clubs and others recommending to WMATA to commit to an all-bus electric fleet by 2045, but I am one of the people in 16th Street Heights who are requesting that that the buses that are left in our neighborhood be 100% electric, and that the renovation of the bus barn be renovated only to support electric buses. Thank you.
Greetings. My name is Kathy English Holt. I live at 1400 Ingraham Street, Northwest Washington, D.C., and this is regarding the 14th Street bus garage. I am in favor of no buses coming back to this area until they are all electric, as the Sierra Club has indicated would be happening by 2045. I don't think our neighborhood should have to wait 25 years before we are able to ensure a safe place to be with regard to the health and wellness of my grandchildren. I am 63 years old. I raised my children in this community. I've been in this neighborhood for 26 years, and I know the effects of the bus barn. I have borne witness to the testimony. I have read the reports, and I'm very concerned. Please hold off on bringing buses back until we are ensured they are not diesel and that we are not at risk in our community. Thank you very much. A citizen of Washington, D.C., 16th Street Heights. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Mary Theory. I'm a D.C. resident. I've lived in Ward 3 for over 40 years. I'm a daily Metro bus rider, and I think these buses should be converted to electricity as soon as is possible to decrease our reliance on fossil fuel. Thank you very much for listening to my testimony.
Hello, my name is Barbara Briggs. I live in Washington, D.C. in Ward 3, and I want to urge the Metro Board to speed the acquisition and adoption of electric buses here in the district. It's time. It's something that was encouraged and authorized by Clean Energy D.C. I ride a bike, and many of the buses, when you ride behind them, they're absolutely filthy. They have to be contributing significantly to the district's greenhouse gas emissions and certainly undercutting the health of our residents. So I would ask you to move as quickly as possible on the adoption of an electric bus fleet to replace our old fossil fuel-based buses. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Catherine Kane, and I'm a resident of the 16th Street Heights neighborhood in Washington, D.C. I'm calling to express my endorsement of the Sierra Club report about electric buses and to ask that Metro commits to 100% electric by 2045 and to immediately start taking the requisite steps in that direction. I live about 3 blocks away from the Northern Bus Barn, which is currently under reconstruction, and it's very important to me that we discontinue the use of diesel buses in that location and across the city, because I have seen the health effects which it has had in my community, which has been very destructive for a lot of people. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Hi, my name is Julia Elliott. I live at 4612 15th Street Northwest in Washington, D.C., and I'm calling to endorse the Sierra Club report calling for 100% electrification of buses by 2045 in our region. I have a personal interest in this. I live in the 16th Street Heights neighborhood where Metro is planning to rebuild the bus garage. And I and everyone in my neighborhood, every single person is deeply opposed to bringing diesel buses into our residential neighborhood. We do not want the carbon pollution in our neighborhood, and we do not want to deal with the health effects that this pollution will bring into our neighborhood. We are deeply invested in fighting against diesel buses coming back into our neighborhood, and we hope that rather than doing so, Metro can invest in a electric fleet, which I think everyone would fully support. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Yes, my name is Jocelyn Regals. Our family and I live at 1302 Delafield Place Northwest in Ward 4. I am calling regarding sustainability plan for Metro and to request strongly that Metro get on board with having an all-electric fleet of buses by 2030 or 2045 at the latest. It's time for Metro to join the rest of the big cities in this country and the world in committing to an all-electric bus fleet. I don't understand why it can't happen and why Metro is being so reticent about it. I live 1.5 blocks from the Northern Garage Bus Barn on 14th Street, where they intend to bring diesel buses back. My young son died of leukemia at the age of 5 just last year on October 5th. I don't know what his leukemia cause was, but I know that I live at 1.5 blocks from a highly polluting bus barn, and I can't help but wonder if this is perhaps what a potential cause for his leukemia. I cannot understand why a bus barn that is going to be completed in 6 years can't become all electric. It makes no sense to me. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Elise Stork. I live in Washington, D.C., and I'm calling to strongly endorse the Sierra Club's proposal that all of our public transport move to a sustainable method of electrical and potentially other sustainable power sources by 2045. I feel very strongly that the nation's capital should set an example in this regard. My family only has one car. We use public transportation, and I would be very proud as a resident of DC to have a fleet of Metro buses that were not using fossil fuels. Thank you very much for all that you're doing to keep our city well run and moving. And I really encourage you to consider the Sierra Club proposal. Thank you very much. And if you have questions, you should have my phone number on this recording, 202-747-4. Thanks. Bye.
Hello, my name is Nicholas Christie. I work in Washington, D.C. Every day of the week. Calling about the effort to fully electrify your fleet of 1,600 buses operating within the district limits. I work in renewable energies, and this is a huge issue for me. I know DC is geared towards this, and I really think you guys should pursue the deadline or the goal of going fully electric by 2045, and also making a public commitment or a public plan available to the masses. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Glenn, Glenn, last name Marcus, Marcus, and I live in Woodley Park in the District of Columbia in Ward 3, and I'm calling to urge Metro to buy electric buses. Los Angeles, I think San Francisco, and other forward-thinking cities are going in that direction. I think I don't need to say why, it's a much better plan than CNG or diesel. So please strongly consider it. I'm sure there's a way for this to be done. and I hope you'll be able to follow through on that better plan for electric-powered buses. Thank you, and good luck with all Metro issues. Bye-bye.
Hi there, my name is Allison Shaw, and I am in Washington, D.C. in Ward 6, and I'm calling ahead of the board meeting to support the 100% electric by 2045 for the buses. I live right off 8th Street where the 90 and the 92 go by. My bedroom's right above where the buses go, and the buses are so loud, and the pollution that I can see coming off of them is overwhelming. I think about climate change every day, and it's my top concern. And I just think if we could electrify the buses, I know there would be a huge drop in the carbon that we output as a city. And I'm also want to refer to the Sierra Club report about electrifying the buses. So anyway, thank you so much for your time. Bye-bye.
End of messages.
Good morning, Chair Smedberg and members of the board.
Or written comments. We appreciate them very much. Again, we weren't able to read all of them, but all the comments will be available, as was mentioned earlier, on the WMATA website, and the board members will have access to them through their various portals. So that concludes the public comments. Now we will move on to the reports by the advisory committees. Now we have reports from the Accessibility Advisory Committee Chair, Phil Posner, and from the Riders Advisory Council Chair, Andrew Carrick. Both advisory reports are posted online at wamata.com. Now I'll turn the floor over to
Chairman Smedberg and members of the board. It's my privilege to be able to present you all with this month's Riders Advisory Council report. Good morning from this Orange Line train to Vienna. Over the last month, the Riders Advisory Council has been able to discuss a number of issues, not least the ongoing response by WMATA to the COVID-19 pandemic. We are, of course, continuing our discussions on this matter because we continue to be concerned, not least about mask distribution and sanitizer stations, in stations, and the ability of people to get where they're going in a way that preserves their ability to support themselves in these extremely challenging times. Over the last 7 months, we've seen WMATA continue to promise large-scale distribution of masks and placement of sanitizer stations within Earth's sanitizer station and the bare minimum in Metro Rail stations. With nearly 280,000 people approximately riding Metro Rail and Metro Bus every day, our concerns are very serious, and WMATA must act to further improve the distribution of masks and sanitizer. You'll excuse me, we're approaching my station in just a moment, but I'll be back once I get to work.
Over the last 7 months is serious. Whereas other transit agencies, for example, New York City's MTA, as early as April and May, WMATA has yet to begin large-scale distribution. I don't mean just the disposable surgical masks in some Metro Rail stations, but not all. I mean specifically the over 1 million cloth masks that were provided by the FTA and have yet to be distributed. I mean the sanitizer stations that were supposed to be established across the Metro Rail and hopefully also the Metro Bus system. This failure is serious, and it is likely to be the largest factor in preventing greater restoration of WMATA, Metro Rail, and, of course, the remaining Metro Bus ridership that hasn't returned. The mask I was wearing in my video this morning was in fact provided by the Starbucks at Virginia Square. In early September, Starbucks began distributing masks, these disposable surgical masks, at every store, providing a way for people to access a mask if they didn't have one. This morning, I grabbed one just to make the point. WMATA has failed to effectively distribute the masks it has, and the masks that it may be able to acquire. As of Monday evening, as I was writing the report to you all, it seemed apparent that some stations have, in fact, received disposable surgical masks, but as yet, I have yet to see a single report via social media or to myself personally or anecdotally from other writers that there are hand sanitizing stations available across the system. Whereas other transit agencies have in fact been quite forthright with customer agencies, for example, San Francisco's Bay Area Rapid Transit, have shown themselves to be especially forthright in their communications about how, for example, ventilation systems work on board their transit vehicles. We know through numerous studies that COVID is spread primarily through aerosol transmission and not surface-to-surface transmission. This should be obvious to all of us now. Unfortunately, WMATA's communication is mainly focused on surface cleaning and has very little overall information about how, for example, ventilation might work on a 7000 or 3000 series train. This would be reassuring to riders, and the ones I have spoken with, for example, the ones who sent me the blog post by Bay Area Rapid Transit, highlighted this post as a way of reassuring themselves that WMATA's cars are also safe. But riders need to hear it from WMATA. It's not enough to say we're cleaning once in the morning in an enhanced and thoughtful way. Hospital-grade cleaners are great, but what's it doing at 3 p.m.? In addition to BART, of course, Portland, Oregon's TriMet recently published a similar blog post and series of tweets that broke the blog post down in a easily digestible way, explaining in a similar fashion to BART how their transit ventilation systems work. These efforts are models for WMATA, and their ongoing failure to communicate this is why, for example, when I come to work every morning, I'm the only person in my office who would dare do so. 7 months ago, we usually had a full car all to ourselves, all 15 to 20 of us. Today, that's not the case. I am, of course, very fortunate insofar as I can work from home. I choose to come out here every day for personal reasons, but many cannot. And these are, essential workers at grocery stores, healthcare workers, who don't have another choice. And their concerns about WMATA and their likelihood or potential to catch COVID on WMATA are serious, and they must be taken seriously. There is too much at stake, both for these individuals and for the transit agency in the future. In a similar way, budget revisions that you've now been asked to consider beginning in January raise serious questions about the ability of many of these same workers to be able to use WMATA to get to and from work, especially later night shift workers. Of course, it is understandable in many ways that WMATA's budget is what it is, and that the failure of Congress to act in a responsible way now imperils the future of WMATA over the coming year. This is, of course, quite unfortunate. At the same time, we urge you that should either this current Congress or a future Congress to be sworn in January is able to act, that WMATA staff prepare a plan to more rapidly turn around service instead of a 3-month time period. We also want to thank Peter Cafiero, Allison Davis, and Al Himes for their work to develop the revised bus service guidelines. We hope that the bus service guidelines will lead to perhaps a full network redesign, which has been done in Houston, for example, which has seen its bus ridership improve considerably. However, we do have some questions. For example, we do need further definition on specific terms. Our presentation on WMATA's revised bus service guidelines suggests that BRT level service, or BRT buses overall, could run as infrequently as 30 minutes. If you consider, for example, the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy, their bus rapid transit standard. Bus rapid transit should be no more than every 10 to 15 minutes in the off-peak period. We still don't have off-board payment, which means paying at the bus stop instead of on board, something that could, in fact, delay the bus. This is standard in BRT systems around the country and around the world, and WMATA should lead on this issue. Metroway, by the most basic definition, is not in this sense full BRT. It's unfortunate too, because Metroway has so much potential, especially with further extensions south, along areas that are not currently served by the blue and yellow lines. We also have concerns, but are somewhat optimistic about the possibility that these new policy guidelines might result in bus stop consolidation, certainly fraught, if sometimes necessary, process. We urge WMATA, if that is the plan, to do so carefully. It goes without saying that bus stop consolidation has the potential to negatively impact a lot of more vulnerable riders. That said, the potential for additional investment in the remaining bus stops is high, and we urge WMATA to develop minimum standards in conjunction with jurisdictional partners. Of course, we are aware that many bus stops are not in fact maintained or owned by WMATA, but instead the jurisdictions they reside in. Finally, I want to take a moment to report a number of accessibility concerns that we've discussed in conjunction with our colleagues in the Accessibility Advisory Committee. For example, the new platform information displays, the PIDs, along the rebuilt stations on the Orange Line, west of Ballston, and along the blue and yellow lines, south of National Airport, have significant issues for those with accessibility needs. They don't display the same information or enough information about elevator and escalator outages that the legacy PIDs across the rest of the system do, and this is unfortunate. They're also poorly spaced from one another. If you are standing in the middle of the platform in Vienna, I wish you good luck in trying to read it. And this is not just the case at Vienna, but also at stations along the blue and yellow line last year. The sight lines are very bad and they're very difficult to read. Partially, this could be fixed with redesign of the overall display, but WMATA should consider adding additional displays along the platforms where possible. We also would like to highlight the fact that, frankly, some of these displays don't even work correctly. Almost 2 months after the completion of this project, we still are in a position where the displays are quite buggy, they reboot. We're very happy that WMATA is getting more out of Windows 10. Unfortunately, that doesn't help a lot of people get the transit information they need to get to their destination. Finally, and this is an ongoing concern both for the AAC and the RAC, WMATA's website does not meet some of the most basic accessibility criteria. But when I say accessibility criteria, I mean the internationally recognized standards developed by the World Wide Web Consortium, headed, of course, by the inventor of what we now consider the Internet, Tim Berners-Lee. The W3C standards lay out a number of conditions. For example, the contrast on a given page. It was pointed out by the RAC's Pat Sheehan, who also sits on the Accessibility Advisory Committee, that the budget information website for the budget revisions that were discussed at last week's public comment session had considerable problems with the contrast, so that people who might be sight impaired in one way or the other could not fully may have had difficulty reading those buttons and participating in public comment. This is a serious issue. It hinders the ability of many, many people across our region, many WMATA riders, to access the information they need on the website. And we strongly urge WMATA to evaluate their overall website design, which has been called Byzantine by people who are new to this area or people visiting the area, and by members of the AAC and the RAC are concerned especially with the accessibility standards. I want to thank you all for your time today, and just remind you one last time that as you consider budget revisions for the coming fiscal year, for the coming third and fourth quarters of this year, and also the FY22 budget, please consider one thing. The choices you all make today will echo long into the future. Maybe after many of you all have left the board. But WMATA's ability to recover from the overall ridership decline and win back customers who may now be using other modes, for example, driving a single occupant vehicle. These are very serious decisions. I don't envy the choices you have to make. But I urge you to please do everything you can to protect the future of this agency in a responsible and thoughtful way. Thank you all very much. Please stay healthy and well.
Good morning. It's been a busy September and October for WMATA and the AAC. We all continue working and discussing issues of safety, accessibility, and sustainability through meetings, hearings, and public input. We'd like to thank Mr. Smedberg for attending our October meeting and updating us on board issues and the plan for the recent hearings. We look forward to meeting with Mr. Wiedefeld to discuss budget updates and future accessibility and sustainability issues, as well as offering our help with the current accessibility difficulties WMATA is suffering with the homepage and website. Last month, Ms. Impastato presented the updated safety measures in use during the COVID recovery plan. She further informed us that Metro has continued to extend and expand their cleaning practices as detailed in our current letter to the board. The AAC appreciates all that WMATA has done and is continuing to do in this time of the pandemic in order to ensure safety and service procedures are maintained and that accessibility is not compromised. As you may remember, the AAC hopes to participate in emergency training exercises, which would be helpful to WMATA in preparing for incidents similar to the recent train evacuation caused by the car decouplings on the Red Line. Our participation has been inhibited in the past by the requirement that we sign a waiver of our right to seek help for injuries or equipment damage incurred during our participation. Ms. Impastato addressed the ongoing request to eliminate this waiver by stating that the waivers were necessary in order to control WMATA's cost for insurance coverage. The AAC would like to point out how valuable participation by AAC members is for training WMATA workers for incidents that might involve blind, deaf, mobility device dependent passengers, as well as those with cognitive issues. The AAC suggests that WMATA might implement self-insurance to cover injuries or equipment damage suffered by AAC volunteers and not require a waiver. The combination of WMATA's sovereign immunity and WMATA's insurance deductible fund should remove the financial need for these waivers. We believe that participants should be protected if injuries to themselves, as well as their equipment and service animals, that might occur during emergency exercises. Gregory Edwards, who's the director of the Bus Operating Control Center, provided us with information about several types of shuttles used when an elevator is out of service in the rail system. The committee was also informed that when needed, and if available, Metro Access vehicles can also be utilized for shuttle service. As a result of recent public comments at our meetings concerning denial of shuttle service by station managers, the ADAP Ombudsman and staff are following up on these complaints and the need for enhanced training of station managers regarding shuttles and their use and their availability. The AAC further discussed budget issues and presented information at the recent hearings. We hope that the federal government will supply financial support. We all hope that that's going to happen before all the draconian measures in the hearing docket are needed in January. After listening to public input at our meetings, we suggest that WMATA develop the use of microbus service as piloted in Montgomery County and suggested by the Bus Transformation Project. The DC B2R, Bus to Rail program, is another successful remedy for reduced rail hours and has been incredibly valuable for home health workers. Further, we have seen you use public, government, and private shuttles during the recent shutdown of the orange, blue, and silver work for platform improvement. We think these will be very helpful if businesses or the government can develop them. Please continue serving those essential and home health workers, as well as those residents living in transportation deserts. Thank you for your time, and always happy to help.
Carrick, for your comments and reports. Before we move on to my report, I do want to make a comment, though, something that Mr. Carrick said. I want the public to know, or anyone who's listening to this or who may listen to this afterward, that WMATA has been a leader in the cleanliness and keeping up with the customer safety on its rail cars and its buses. In fact, several agencies have reached out to WMATA for advice and guidance because of the procedures, and WMATA has been seen as a leader in this area. Second, the communications team has been working hard to get the word out to all different venues to report out that we have masks, we have sanitizing, hand sanitizing stations available. In fact, I saw one tweet recently from Jordan Pascal of WAMU that he saw masks and hand sanitizing stations in his station close to his home. And there have been reports of others. So I don't want to let the public take away anything that, that WMATA is not doing anything or trying to communicate out to folks that we are somehow neglecting this. We take it very seriously. I know Mr. Wiedefeld, the general manager, the chief safety officer, Ms. Empasado, and others on the team are taking these measures very, very seriously. Our chief medical officer with our employees, their safety throughout all of this, particularly as ridership is beginning to tick up, even during the pandemic. So I want to let people know that those efforts are well underway and communication is going out at different venues, whether it be at the local community level up to regional, television and radio stations. So please, be aware of those efforts that WMATA has underway. So next, we'll go to the report of the chair, my report. First, on behalf of the board, I'd like to thank the DC Council, specifically Facilities and Procurement Committee Chair Robert White, for hosting a roundtable on WMATA yesterday. I, along with the general manager and Chief Pavlik and Mr. Aniseki, the CFO, we highlighted Metro's response to the pandemic, as well as strides we've made in equity and policing. Again, we want to thank the DC Council for a productive discussion on these issues. And speaking of the budget, I'd like now to address the FY21 budget comments that just closed. The board would like to thank all our customers and stakeholders who took the time to give us their feedback on the proposed fiscal year 21 budget amendment proposal. we had approximately 3,000 responses to the budget survey and 30 people who participated in the public hearing. We look forward to receiving the public outreach staff report next month. Also, as we conclude the FY21 budget amendment process, I will note that the general manager will present the fiscal year 2022 operating and capital budget, proposed budgets next month. We expect to face the same financial hardships in fiscal year 22 that we are facing today. We will build off of what we've learned in the 21 process to help Metro restore financial stability in fiscal year 22 and in the future, even with the uncertainty of the pandemic and any federal support that may or may not be coming forward. Finally, I've asked the general manager and our chief safety officer, Teresa Posado, to provide a public update today on the red line uncoupling incident on October 9th. We welcome the Metro Safety Commission's recommendation, corrective action related to this incident as an opportunity to improve rail safety event investigations. In addition to today's update, the board will receive an update on the status of the corrective action plan next month at our safety committee meeting. This concludes my report. I'll now turn the floor over to the general manager for his report, Mr. Wiedefeld.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to the board members. Again, before giving my remarks, other remarks I do want to make, I would like to have our Chief Safety Officer update you on our investigation into the red line uncoupling. But before turning over to Teresa, let me first say, as the chairman, as you just mentioned, and I did yesterday at the DC Council, that we are taking these incidents one at a time, but we are also taking a holistic safety culture reform approach to our investigations. First, we recognize that our essential workers are dedicated to their jobs and committed to their safe operations. As managers, it's our responsibility to give them all the tools they need to navigate when something goes wrong. You will hear from Teresa today that we are missing some of those tools. The procedures and clarity of roles necessary to protect evidence during investigations of incidents is an example. What I want to say clearly to the board and to our employees is that you will see actions related to creating a just culture approach to safety. It's one that learns from mistakes. It's an approach that finds facts, not fault. And whether it's an investigation, investigating rail incidents, strengthening the rock, or something else that we're not even aware of today, we will be tightening up processes and trainings and teaching that cultural approach throughout the entire organization. Now, let me have Teresa explain in further detail the red line uncoupling incident. Teresa?
Thank you, sir. Before I begin this presentation, I want to echo the sentiments expressed by the general manager and affirm Metro's commitment to full and thorough investigations. As Chief Safety Officer, I take very seriously the moral and ethical obligations of my office and hold as sacrosanct the integrity of our investigation process. As part of our commitment to critical self-assessment, we're employing a systems approach to our investigations, emphasizing a values supportive model of shared accountability. We are moving from looking at errors as individual failures to realizing that they are caused or enabled by system failures. We're working to expand our investigations beyond answering the question of what happened to understand why. And how we respond to staff behaviors fairly and justly. In turn, staff members are accountable for the quality of their choices and for reporting both their errors and vulnerabilities in the system. This transformation will only be successful with full transparency in our investigations and continuous demonstration of our commitment to become an organization that is continually learning, adjusting, and redesigning systems for safety while managing behavioral choices within those systems. With this in mind, I will present the preliminary factual findings of our investigation into the train separation event, which occurred on October 9th, 2020. The investigation remains active and information is subject to change as the investigation proceeds. At approximately 12:18 p.m., Redline Train 108, consisting of 8 6000 series cars, separated while in service shortly after departure from Union Station on track number 1. The separation occurred between the second and third cars in the consist. Upon separating, the emergency braking system activated, bringing the train to a stop in approximately 172 feet. The DC Fire Department, Metro Transit Police Department, and WMATA's safety and rail transportation teams responded to the scene, and all external parties were notified accordingly. As the investigation into this incident is underway, led by Metro's safety team, we are reviewing the results of inspections and testing of equipment, interviewing employees and responders, and conducting an extensive data and records review. This slide depicts the area in which the incident occurred. The aerial photograph on the left notes the location of the separation with a red X. The area of the separation is north of Union Station and adjacent to Amtrak's terminal tracks. The area is of ascending grade of 3.93%. The diagram on the right indicates the final resting positions of the consist, with each red block depicting 2 connected cars. The 4 photographs on the leftmost portion of this slide are photos taken at the scene of the incident and illustrate the separation of coupler components. The coupler consists of a mechanical hook, which joins the rail cars physically, and side-mounted electrical connections, which connect the train's electrical systems from car to car. The outermost mechanical and electrical components of the coupler remained connected, with the separation occurring further back in the assembly. The exploded view in the right upper corner depicts the specific portion of the coupler assembly, referred to as the draft gear, that is the focus of our post-incident inspections and testing. In this incident, the separation occurred when the drawbar separated from the buffer tube. These 2 components are in the middlemost pictures. To continue to drill down to the components which we are focusing on in this investigation, the buffer tube screw provides the clamping force required to secure a component referred to as a gland nut, which holds the drawbar in place. We'll discuss these components further later in this presentation. As part of the investigation, an incident chronology was assembled using first-hand accounts from responding individuals and data recordings obtained from systems of record in the ROC. As the chronology depicts, a smoldering crosstie in the area of the incident, along with reports of passenger self-evacuations, compounded the response needs and protracted the timeline to escort passengers to safety. Metro's safety team is working with the Office of Emergency Management and responders to conduct an incident debriefing and critique session, which will review the chain of events with regard to the response, with the goal of improving the passenger experience through identifying gaps in response and communications and developing procedural adjustments to lessen the duration of dwell time and to reduce confusion while maintaining the safest and most comfortable conditions for our customers. At this point in the investigation, we have completed on-site inspections of the infrastructure and reviewed inspection and maintenance records of the track and signal systems, with no defects or anomalous conditions identified. No damages were observed that would indicate a collision or other external factors which would have led to the separation. The train event data recorder indicates that the train was operating at approximately 24 miles per hour at the time of the separation. This is in accordance with required speeds in the area, and no issues with train handling were identified in this incident. With regard to the 6000 series equipment, a fleet-wide inspection was conducted, which identified 6 rail cars with potential discrepancies in the coupler assemblies, requiring further inspections, including 3 cars with incorrect hardware. These trains have all been removed from service for further examination. With regard to the incident coupler, the coupler was replaced as part of Metro's overhaul program in November of 2019. Since the coupler replacement, the rail car underwent several inspections, none of which indicated any issues with the coupler. The coupler traveled roughly 30 miles since the replacement, and the typical interval for coupler replacement is approximately 8 years based upon mileage. This leads the investigation to focus on the overhaul process, as the components were not advanced in their life cycle and there was no evidence of excessive wear, material fatigue, or degradation. In 2018, a similar event occurred outside of McLean Station. This incident was investigated, and the causal factor was determined to be the use of an incorrect bolt, which produced a similar failure mode as we've observed in the current incident. As a result of this investigation, corrective actions included process modifications and inspections. At this point in our investigation, we do not possess sufficient data to conclude whether or not the 2 incidents are related, and we will continue to collect facts and data to determine the relationship, if any, between the incidents. Having provided an update on the factual findings to date, I'd like to share our findings relative to the procedural escapes that occurred in the execution of the investigation process. This slide depicts the current understanding of the chronology of events associated with the mechanical inspection and testing of the coupler, as determined by employee interviews and eyewitness accounts. After the on-scene portion of the investigation was completed on Friday evening, the involved consist was moved to the Brentwood yard for further examination. Present in Brentwood were the safety investigation team, members of Metro Management, and the rail car maintenance team. In Brentwood, technicians were instructed to perform an inspection, including a torque test. Given constraints identified with tooling and the environment in Brentwood, it was decided that the coupler would be removed from the incident train and sent to the major repair and overhaul facility at Greenbelt Yard, which would provide a more idealized environment for controlled testing. Arrangements to remove and transport the coupler were made, but the assembly was not sealed with protective wrapping due to a lack of available materials on site. The testing was scheduled for Saturday morning in Greenbelt Yard, and at that point, most of the involved staff had left the facility for the evening. At some point before the coupler was moved, technicians performed testing to determine the torque reading of the buffer tube screw. The technicians recorded their findings and transmitted the information via email. The coupler was later transported to Greenbelt Yard, and it was discovered upon inspection that the torque stripe on the buffer tube screw and nut was no longer intact, indicating that the component had been subject to mechanical forces. At this point, the discrepancy was escalated to executive management, and an independent investigation into the chain of custody and the investigation process was initiated. Based upon statements of employees present at the shop, there was a confusion among the workforce as to whether or not the instruction to perform the testing and obtain a torque reading at Brentwood was in effect. Employees expressed conflicting understandings of the plan for testing. There was a lack of effective material control by tagging, shrink wrapping, and physically quarantining or otherwise securing the equipment, which did not take place. To explain further, I'd like to briefly review the concept of torque and what was discovered in this incident. Torque is the radial application of force with the intent to cause rotation. This creates a clamping force between 2 parts. Torque is a quantifiable requirement measured in foot-pounds for fastening components, and deviations from the prescribed torque value can result in failures, causing separation of parts. As part of assuring adequate torque, a torque stripe is applied to a fastener to visually indicate whether or not a bolt has moved. The upper right-hand photo depicts the intact torque stripe while it remains attached to the train. The below picture indicates the misalignment of the torque stripe observed at Greenbelt Yard, indicating that the bolt had been subject to mechanical forces. As we proceed through the investigation into the chain of custody and adherence to the investigation process, we have identified multiple gaps in understanding of roles, responsibilities, and protocols surrounding incident investigations. These gaps are present at multiple levels within Metro. The current investigation process details expectations for investigators, information about the preservation of evidence, but lacks formal protocols for access controls and documentation of chain of custody. These provisions are critical to preserve the integrity of the investigatory evidence and must be addressed from a procedural perspective. The existing training curriculum for incident investigation also focuses nearly exclusively on the investigator's role for managers. Currently, employees who may be tasked with supporting an investigation do not receive any training on their role in that function. It is imperative that all Metro employees understand the purpose of and process for conducting investigations. Employees must understand expectations surrounding their interface with investigations, and we must communicate, visually identify, and appropriately secure evidence. Recognizing these procedural shortcomings, we are undertaking a comprehensive reevaluation of the investigation process to identify further opportunities to improve our efforts. We will apply the lessons learned from prior investigations, as well as this incident, to clarify expectations and establish accountability for the execution of processes. The specific actions we are taking and the timeline for execution will be detailed in our corrective action plan to address the WMSC's finding with regard to this topic. In closing, our next steps are to continue the fact-finding efforts of our investigation, including the results of laboratory and engineering analyses of materials, and an in-depth review of our maintenance and overhaul processes. We anticipate completing this investigation and submitting the report to the WMSC within the required 60-day timeframe. This concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to address any questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Impastato. Appreciate that update very much. We'll open it up for questions. Vice Chair Gideby.
Thank you for this thorough report. I also just want to acknowledge the change in narrative around how we're looking at safety and its culture. I think it speaks to an opportunity to allow for people to come forward and in an intentional way, as you talk about it being a critical self-assessment and really thinking about how to focus on the facts, not just the faults. So I see that as an evolution from even where we were this summer. I don't have specific questions regarding the separation event, given your briefing that you've given the board, but I just want to thank you for your continued leadership and evolution as to how to think about addressing these issues and making space to have the discussions among staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Vice Chair Goldman.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Impastato, for your report. It's very comprehensive and it follows the comprehensive report you provided to the board in executive session last week. I guess since that time, the issue of the chain of custody issue has developed, and I put that aside for a minute. From your presentation last week as well as today, I guess for me as a board member, the two principal areas of concern are first on the uncoupling incident. Why, when there had been a previous incident, as you described the McLean incident a year or two ago, which seemed to result in a similar factual situation, why that didn't result in a series-wide recall or inspection of all the couplers or all the series 6000 series trains, and essentially identify the problem then, so that we didn't have the problem that resulted 2 weeks ago. on the red line with an uncoupling with what seems to be a similar series of facts. So I think that's a gap that as a board member, I want to better understand what was the failure there and who's responsible for that, whether it's personnel or in terms of procedures and protocols. Second of all, the issue that is non-mechanical, which has to do with communications with the passengers, the riders who were on the trains, still concerns me greatly. I appreciate, while you didn't go into the details today, that because of the separation, the train operator could not communicate with passengers in the separated 6-car set. It continues to trouble me that there's no protocol in place, and there wasn't a protocol in place for someone in Metro to actually be on the scene and get on that train and explain and what processes were being undertaken by Metro to provide for their evacuation. I mean, the total time was that riders were on those trains for an hour and a half to 2 hours before all 103 passengers were evacuated. And it just troubles me greatly that after we had an incident a year or so ago, McLean, that we didn't have procedures in place that would deal with the communication problem and advise riders on the trains that there was a problem and how long it would take Metro to identify the problem and provide for their evacuation. So I'm still looking for those reports, and I hope you'll be able to provide myself and other board members with a explanation for that and a new protocol going forward in your next report. Thank you.
Absolutely, sir. With regard to your first statement about the comparison between the two incidents, after the separation at McLean, there was an extensive fleet-wide inspection performed, and there were material modifications made to the couplers. That specific incident identified the use of a non-conforming material, a bolt, that was not in accordance with the OEM specification. By using the improper bolt, it resulted in a thread misalignment, which produced a false torque reading. We don't believe at this point in the investigation that we have a similar causal factor, but we are observing that the separation of the couplers appears to be among like components, meaning that the drawbar separated from the buffer tube in both incidents. We are continuing to investigate and drill down to determine the efficacy of the prior incident's corrective actions. And if we determine there's a relationship between both incidents' failure modes, we'll be looking very closely to identify where the corrective actions from the prior incident were deficient so that we can address and improve them.
Thank you. I know I'm going to prolong this, but I think what I heard you say is that the bolt in this instance on the red line was an OEM, an original equipment manufacturing bolt, so it didn't have the same properties as being a non-OEM part from the McLean incident. And so therefore you're looking at different parts of the assembly as the perhaps root cause of the separation?
Yes, in the McLean incident, it was a non-conforming bolt, an undersized bolt.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. Director Horner.
Thanks. I will pass on asking questions now because I have too many for this forum. So I will reserve. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Letourneau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I would echo the concern, and I've expressed it before, about the communication side of this with customers in particular, and agree that hopefully we can have a protocol in place to be able to communicate more effectively in situations where audio is cut from the train, as it was in this case, just in terms of helping to calm those passengers and help them understand what the plan is. I know there were complications with exactly how to effectively handle the incident afterwards in terms of getting the folks off. But that's concerning. It's obviously concerning it happened in the first place, but I understand there's obviously an investigation going on. Maybe the one question that I have, just to clarify, maybe put a finer point on it in relation to the chain of custody situation is it your belief, Teresa, that there were no deliberate attempts to obscure any evidence or hinder the investigation?
That's correct, sir. It's my understanding, based upon interviews with employees and a review of the incident chronology, that there were no attempts made of nefarious origin. We believe that this was the result of a lack of clear and consistent communication and enabled by gaps in our process for securing evidence.
Okay. Was it more that the employees were not following protocols, or that the protocols didn't exist or weren't as complete as they need to be, or a combination?
It's a combination of all. There were protocols, but they were not sufficiently detailed, or existing or in place, communicated to an effective level to enable all employees to understand to the degree to which their activities were in support of or compliance with those protocols.
Okay, appreciate that. And I also appreciate your candor in this. I think I would agree with what Ms. Gideby said earlier, in that I think in my experience over the last several months, unfortunately, we've had several of these incidents, but I do think you and your team have been as transparent as possible about them. And you can't get better unless that's the case. So I do appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Alternate Director Mehroutian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to just echo Director Letourneau's sentiment. Teresa, I appreciate your transparency and all the work that you've done and your team has done, and appreciate the thoroughness of this report. I don't have any follow-up questions.
Thank you. Director Slater.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just want to kind of echo the comments on the concerns with communications, and I look forward to seeing the details as this continues to advance and complete, and I'll reserve my questions until that time.
Director McMillan.
Teresa, on the torque stripe, and forgive me if you're repeating here, understanding that investigation continues and a proper chain of custody would definitively answer this question. Do we believe the torque stripe was intact prior to the overnight torque check? So when they reported that they had performed that, they said it was intact when they started? Correct. Okay.
It was observed intact both in the field and in the Brentwood facility.
Got it. Okay. And then if it turns out that the bolt was improperly torqued at the time, it's possible the stripe could have been applied at that point, but to an incorrectly torqued nut.
Correct.
Okay, but that remains under investigation.
Yes, the torque level and the torque testing are all still pending review. We are awaiting laboratory reports on the bolt and conducting a further engineering analysis.
Okay, and I know it goes beyond the policy responsibilities of this board, but I do appreciate the additional technical detail and diagrams that were reflected in this presentation. So thanks. That's all.
Thank you. Ms. Imposato, I have some questions, but I think I'll wait until we're a little further along with your investigation and at a little later stage. So thank you again, Teresa. Appreciate that very much. And again, as Ms. Gideby and Mr. Letourneau and Mr. Mehroutian said, really do appreciate the transparency and the approach.
Teresa and her entire team, and the entire team, to be frank,
yeah.
To get to the bottom of some of these issues, and again, to focus as much on what happened, but more importantly, long term, is how do we start to change the culture to support where we all want to be. So in addition to the internal work we are doing to strengthen safety, we're also working externally to reassure our riders that we are doing our part to ensure their safety during the pandemic. Last month, we further solidified our safety commitments by signing on to the American Public Transportation Association's Safety and Health Commitment Program. Together with more than 100 public transit systems, Metro and the public transit industry are working to increase public confidence in transit by sending the message that we're committed to COVID-19 safety. The seal of commitment, the APTA seal of commitment, can be found on Metro's website and other public materials highlighting our pledge to do the following: follow official guidelines, guidance from health authorities, protect each other through smart practices and behaviors, make informed choices based on timely information, and always put health first. A key component of the program is shared responsibility of our system and our customers. This is an important message as riders return to the system. In August, we saw our ridership numbers double compared to the lowest point at the start of the pandemic in March and April. But that still leaves ridership down 88% on rail and 50% on bus compared to pre-COVID levels. Those riders return to our system expect Metro to follow strict safety protocols, and similarly, we rely on customers to protect themselves and their fellow riders. We also have a new ad that started running this week that reminds everyone, no mask, no Metro. The spot, which features Metro employees and riders, will appear on local TV and cable networks, digital platforms, radio, and social media to help reach customers wherever they are. If we could, let's play that ad for everyone.
This is our community, and people need to be able to get where they need to go. We're cleaning like never before. Trains, buses, with hospital-grade cleaning.
No mask, no Metro. Need one? We have a few extras.
I ride every day. I can see the care Metro is taking.
You'll find hand sanitizer stations all over the Metro.
At Metro, we're doing our part to keep the DC area moving. Find out more at WMATA.com/doingourpart.
For highlighting all the work that Mr. Aniseki and his team have done with the audit over these last couple of years. It has been quite a dramatic change since I first joined the board, given which wasn't all that long ago, really, when you come to think of it, what the audit was showing when you first came here and where it is now. It's really quite remarkable. And also highlighting the safety measures that you're taking and that Teresa is taking. It means a lot, as you say, as people come back to ridership does slowly tick up, that people are confident that, we are taking the proper steps to ensure their safety while they ride transit. So thank you for doing that. Are there any other questions or comments for Mr. Wiedefeld? If not, let's move on to the Safety and Operations Committee. I'll now call on the chairman, Michael Goldman, for the Safety and Operations Committee report. Mr. Goldman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The following item was referred to the board at the October 8th Safety and Operations Committee. Staff sought approval for Metro's Public Transit Agency Safety Plan, which will be submitted to the Washington Metro Rail Safety Commission under Federal Transit Administration requirements. Once fully implemented, the agency safety plan will replace Metro's System Safety Program plan, currently in effect. The agency safety plan must be updated and certified by the transit agency annually. Mr. Chairman, I move approval.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Goldman. Mr. Goldman has made a motion. Is there a second from a committee member?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Horner. All right, I'll go around as we normally do. Vice Chair Gideby, any questions or comments on the safety plan?
No, no questions at this time.
Thank you. Director Horner?
No, I have no questions. Thank you.
Okay. Director Letourneau?
Nothing from me.
Alternate Director Meridian?
No questions, thank you.
Director Slater?
No questions at this time, thank you.
Director McMillan?
Nothing, thank you.
Comments, Mr. Goldman, before we vote?
No, sir. This was the subject of both full discussion during the committee meeting on October 8th. And prior to then, it was the subject of a training session, which all board members participated in. So I think the safety plan has been thoroughly reviewed and is ready for final action by the board.
Great. Thank you. All right, with no further comments, Ms. Ellison, please call the roll.
Chair Smedberg?
Aye.
Vice Chair Gideby?
Aye.
Vice Chair Goldman?
Aye.
Director Horner?
Aye.
Director Letourneau?
Aye.
Alternate Director Meridian?
Aye.
Director Slater?
Aye.
Director McMillan?
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Okay, thank you. The motion is approved. Next, we'll move on to the consent agenda. We have two consent items before us today. I'd like to move approval of the following. First, the International Brotherhood of Teamsters Local 922 Collective Bargaining Agreement. Staff seeks board approval of a collective bargaining agreement, a CBA, with International Brotherhood of Teamsters Local 922, and authorization for the general manager and CEO to execute the CBA. Terms of the CBA are consistent with the contract with ATU Local 689, recently approved by the board. Local 922 represents approximately 282 members at Metro's Landover Bus Division in Prince George's County. And second, the virtual Smart Trip card waiver or fee waiver for Android. Staff seeks a board authorization to waive the fee for the virtual Smart Trip card for cards issued on Android mobile phones for a period of 6 months, anticipated to begin as early as November 2020. So I'd move approval of both those items. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Secretary Slater. Because these items are consent, there is no discussion, so I'll ask Ms. Ellison to conduct the vote. Ms. Ellison?
Chair Smedberg?
Aye.
Vice Chair Gideby?
Aye.
Vice Chair Goldman?
Aye.
Director Horner?
I'm going to abstain from this vote.
Director Letourneau?
Aye.
Alternate Director Meridian? Alternate Director Meridian?
Aye.
Director Slater?
Aye.
Director McMillan?
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you, Ms. Ellison. Thank you. The items are approved. Next, we'll move on to reports by the jurisdictions. NBTC, I don't have anything to highlight right here. Mr. Letourneau, you have anything you'd like to highlight for NVTC?
No, I don't think so. Obviously, with the budget comments, the Virginia jurisdictions have been engaged as well and looked at the potential implications of some of these. I know there is a desire to see root level data for costs to help evaluate some of the decisions that we have to make. And I know that request has been made of staff, so I would renew that in this setting. But otherwise, that's really been the discussion as we approach the FY22 budget process. There's a lot of questions about where WMATA fits into that. And also, obviously the jurisdictions are working through their own revenue numbers. So that'll be an ongoing conversation.
Thank you. Ms. Gideby for the District of Columbia.
I have no reports, but I want to echo my appreciation both for your leadership, the General Manager, Chief Pavlik, and the CFO, Dennis Anasike, for attending Chairman Robert White's roundtable discussion yesterday. And I appreciate your leadership overall in representing the board and all of the work that we've done to date. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gideby. Mr. Goldman, WSTC.
Yes, I have some good news to report. Last week, Montgomery County welcomed Flash on October 14th. Flash is Montgomery County's world-class bus rapid transit system, a BRT, that opened on October 14th. It runs a line on Route 29 from the Silver Spring Metro station, about 14 miles to Burtonville, which is just south of the Howard-Montgomery County line. It's a world-class system which features low-ride articulated buses, payment before boarding, as our colleague and member from the Riders Advisory Council was promoting, limited number of stops, and dedicated right-of-way for much of the length of the service. So it's the kind of bus rapid transit system that we should be encouraging, financing, and perhaps operating as Metro, and it's one of the board's priorities under the bus transformation study resolution that we adopted. I encourage all to, not only on the board, but in the region, to get a chance, journey out to Montgomery County on Colesville Road and take a shot and give it a little spin on Flash. You can get it at the Silver Spring Metro station and take a short ride into Montgomery County and come back and join Metro to take a ride home. So enjoy Flash, and thank you for the time for this report.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman, and congratulations to the county and the state of Maryland on that effort. It's really great. Mr. Horner, the federal government?
Nothing to report, thanks.
Okay. So with no further business to come before the board, we stand adjourned, and I will move to executive session. In accordance with the bylaws, I, Paul Smithberg, request that the Board of Directors convene an executive session to discuss the following matters pursuant to Article 2, Paragraph 9, subsections A, budgetary matters that may affect legal positions, WMATA contracts, or sensitive relationships with local jurisdictions or the federal government, and F, safety and security matters where premature release would compromise public safety. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Gideby. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We will now convene an executive session. Thank you so much.